Welcome to Malpractice Podcast.
Oh, yay, it's my turn. Are you ready to get started?
I am ready for malpractice in the morning.
Malpractice in the morning. Do-do, do-do-do, do-do, do-do.
Do-do-do-do-do.
We're here. We're drinking coffee. We're Sydney and Jess. Is that your iced coffee swirling around?
Drinking the coffee. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yes.
Is that your transition noise?
So, as I am super good at transitions, let's let's swivel on over.
What are you talking about? There's no transitions here.
There's none. There's none. We have a cool interview, as we always feel like. Everyone that we interview, we end up falling in love with and proposing to be just a permanent co-host on the pod because
Exactly.
we picked great people, to be honest.
We picked the best guests, and honestly, this one is authentically one of my favorites.
I'm obsessed. He's amazing. Sydney's going to give you a bit of background on him professionally, and then we'll kind of transition into like why we love him so much, because we do. I've just adopted him as my child.
As your child? What are you talking about?
I don't know, y'all. I don't know.
He's going to be like, what are they talking about? They were so professional.
They were so professional in the interview, and then they're crazy.
They're crazy, and they're trying to adopt me, which is not something that I want. That's what he's going to say. So just to give a little bit of background on our guest today, his name is Dr. Nate Link, and he attended medical school at Washington University in St. Louis, and afterward he moved to New York with his wife to begin his residency. Since his residency graduation in 1986, Dr. Link has practiced at Bellevue Hospital with ever-increasing levels of responsibility, save for the year in 1990 when he went to Kenya and worked on a public health project.
Yeah. He has won many awards, as he should.
Mm-hmm.
He's an outstanding person. He's an activist, an ally, like an active ally to a variety of communities. And he's an author of a new book called The Ailing Nation, Lessons from the Bedside for America's Leaders, which Sydney and I are both currently reading, which I took to the pool and is now falling apart, but I'm reading it page by page.
Oh my God.
Because it's really good.
It's a great read, I'm not gonna lie.
Highly recommend
Same.
reading it. You can find it on Amazon or at a local bookstore. I ordered mine on Amazon. It came in, like 4 days. But anyway, just like a plug for Amazon. Not that Amazon needs any more plugs.
Yeah, exactly. No, you can buy it at a local independent bookstore if that's your thing, or Amazon if you're impatient.
Do it. Get the book.
Just get the book now. Thank us
and
later.
I want to read, just do it. So I want to read a bit from his acknowledgments. He told me at the end of the interview, after we stopped recording, he was like, read all the way through the book. And so I did, because he told me to, and he is the king of my life. And
I'll do anything he tells me to do.
I literally will. His last, an acknowledgement's like his family, his colleagues. And at the end, I just want to read like the last paragraph, because this really will tee up who he is. And then we'll, hand it off to our interview. So he says, finally, I must give a shout out to my patients, who are the basis of my lessons and the source of my personal growth over a career in medicine. Mm-hmm. I cut my teeth as an intern on Bellevue's storied wards at a time when AIDS ruled supreme over trainees like me. My patients with AIDS gave me my most valuable insights into humility and humanity, the core of the art of medicine, and I can remember their names, faces, and medical presentations as if they were standing right in front of me today. Every one of them suffered unimaginable physical and emotional losses before succumbing to a premature death, but they left behind the valuable lessons that I hope I captured in the pages herein. In a manner of speaking, this is their legacy.
Wow.
And that's just like literally the last thing he wrote in his book is like a legacy to his patients.
That's beautiful.
I was like, don't cry.
Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. Ugh.
So he is a sweet angel and
We love him.
we love him. So here is our interview with Dr. Link.
Welcome, Dr. Link. Thank you so much for being here today. We're very honored to have you here. You are kind of a big deal. So, if you don't mind starting us off by telling us and our listeners a little bit about yourself and your career. We've read a lot about you, but we'd love to hear it from you.
So I am a physician in internal medicine, and my career started in my training at Bellevue Hospital almost 40 years ago. Bellevue Hospital is public safety net hospital in New York City. It's the oldest hospital in the United States. It actually started in 1736. Wow. Now, I've been there almost 40 years, so I feel almost as old as the hospital itself. But this is where I stayed after I trained. I became a physician there, practicing medicine in the clinics and on the inpatient units. I grew in my administrative responsibilities. In 2000, I became the chief of the medicine department at Bellevue. And then in 2012, I became the chief medical officer, which is essentially the medical director, for the hospital. And so in that time, I've just grown in my, patient care and in my administrative responsibilities.
Okay. That's super interesting.
Can I ask you, why did you choose to stay there after you finished your studies?
I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Bellevue is larger than life. It feels like the center of the universe. There are patients there from all over the world. We're famous for treating any patient, no matter what. In our mission statement, it says we treat everyone without exception. You could be a homeless person on the street who doesn't speak English. You could be psychotic. You could be a Wall Street broker. You could be a psychotic Wall Street broker.
Which you might be.
That's
That's likely.
So, it's kind of cool to be at a place that does pure medicine without regard to insurance status or financing, and treat everybody the same, no matter who they are, where they came from. And Bellevue's always had this place in the city as the frontline hospital of the city. And we're a part of an 11 hospital system. It's a public hospital system. We're one of 11 sister hospitals. We're the flagship hospital, and we have the most complex services offered, at our hospital.
That's amazing.
I love that. So it's so interesting because we interviewed another physician, and he attended, went through medical school and went through the whole system, right, at this one university, and then stayed there. And he was now, developing curriculum and doing all sorts of things. And I think he said the same, like he just loved being there. I'm always curious because it's kind of like you get raised there and then you raise other people there. It's kind of
cool.
That's
absolutely true. And you put down roots,
sure.
Honestly. You make your friend, colleague. It's almost like living in a neighborhood. And after a while, you can't imagine yourself being anywhere else.
Yeah.
I love that. High praise for Bellevue, for sure.
Yeah, clearly. Thanks. I want to go back to one of the things that you said, because we watched an interview that you did for the Today Show, and you talked a lot about COVID, and we're going to get to that definitely. But one of the most interesting things that you said, and you repeated it now, is that the hospital has always sort of taken in patients that no one else wanted. Could you talk a little bit more about that history and tell us some of the people that Bellevue took in that no one else wanted?
Sure. Well, again, this goes back to the 1700s, but ever since Bellevue has been there, we've been a hospital of last resort in the city, and especially for infectious diseases. So all through history, there have been diseases we couldn't treat, including yellow fever and smallpox, typhus, tuberculosis, psychiatric conditions that people thought of as just bad behavior and not necessarily a disease. And when I trained in the early 80s, it was AIDS.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, in 2014, we took care of an Ebola patient, and that was a singular achievement.
Wow.
And COVID. So, at times when no one could take care of any patients because there was no cure, Bellevue was a place of last resort. And sometimes patients were sent to Bellevue to die, actually, from other hospitals even.
Yeah.
But as a city hospital, as a public hospital, it was always our mission to take care of everybody. So we were never the hospital that would turn a patient away. And we became, I guess, the path of least resistance for patients, at the end of the road. But we've always taken that to heart.
Yeah.
And it's always brought about, required a lot of compassion and caring. And that's always been an attribute of the hospital.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. It's so interesting. It's like the last line of defense, right? is Bellevue.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's how we see our mission. So we attract physicians and nurses who appreciate that mission, who are drawn to it. I think it means our staff are a different kind of person maybe that works in other hospitals, and it creates a very positive culture. And I think it was one of the keys to our success in the COVID tidal wave that came over us a year ago.
So Bellevue is one of 10 hospitals in the U.S. that has the designation of being a special pathogens hospital. So could you tell us about what that looked like when COVID-19 first hit your workplace?
Sure. Well, let me back up to 2014.
Okay.
That was when the Ebola epidemic was raging in West Africa. And we knew that if somehow Ebola came to New York City, it would land at Bellevue for all the same reasons that everything else, has landed at Bellevue. And we were most definitely nowhere near ready to handle a patient like that. We just did not have the space, the supplies, the training in place to handle such a challenge. So this was in late August 2014. We decided to get ready just in case. We stood up a huge effort to create a special unit, an isolation unit for such a patient. We built a laboratory in the unit so that blood samples wouldn't have to pass through the hospital proper. We purchased a lot of protective equipment. We actually talked to physicians from Africa. We talked to physicians at the CDC. We got advice about equipment. We and the gear that the staff would have to wear. We trained hundreds of staff over a period of a few weeks how to use this equipment. And we created a guide, an 80-page response guide. It was a huge thing. It took 10 weeks. But we were sprinting against the time because it was just getting worse and worse in Africa. We knew sooner or later someone was going to get on a plane and land in New York City.
Right.
So this is a crazy thing, but literally on the day we finished our preparations, we had this meeting, we established, we checked all the boxes and we declared ourselves ready. And then as I walked back to my office, I got a call from the Department of Health. There was a physician who had returned from Guinea. He had a low-grade fever. We're going to need to bring him to Bellevue to be checked out. And this turned out to be our Ebola patient. He was the one with Ebola. He came at just the right time.
Oh my gosh.
We were ready. It went well. As everybody knows, he was cured. Our staff were safe, and it was a great success. It was all about the effort to prepare, though. And after that event, I said to my colleagues, I have spent all my life preparing for disasters that never happened. And I've experienced disasters I wasn't prepared for. Here, it finally matched up. We got ready for something, and then that something happened, and it was a thing of beauty. And it helped me appreciate the importance of preparation. After that took place, it was still the year of COVID. The federal government, the year of Ebola, I call it. The federal government got interested in readiness throughout the nation and asked 3 institutions, that was Bellevue Hospital, Emory University, which is where the CDC is, and Nebraska, which has a biocontainment center that is a federally funded center that also took care of an Ebola patient. We all had experience with Ebola patients, so they asked us to form a consortium together, the 3 of us, and to help lead an effort to teach other hospitals how to do this right and how to prepare. And they formed something called NETEC. I can't remember the letters, National Education and Training for Ebola. And this NETEC group ever since then has been developing materials and curricula and guidelines and training for staff at hospitals around the country. And we have actually gone to visit other hospitals to help them prepare. And as part of this project, the federal government designated 10 hospitals in the United States to be regional centers for special pathogens. That would mean being specially prepared to be able to take the toughest cases and to be able also teach and share with surrounding hospitals to help build up the standards so the whole nation could be better prepared. So this was a setting for us. Now let's go flashback to January 2020 when we heard about the Wuhan virus in China. Our special pathogens team, we have a group of people who focus on this all the time. They heard that report and they said, you know what, we better talk about this. This could be real. So within a few days, we had worked it all out, where we would put such a patient, how we would treat them, what the staff would wear, all the procedures. And then somebody said, well, what if we get 2 patients? And we said, oh yeah, what if we get more than 1 patient? Let's figure that one out. A few months later, we had 400 COVID patients in our hospital. And that shows how laughably inadequate our first thoughts were. But we did prepare over those 2 months as COVID picked up steam and wound up in Italy and then out in Seattle. We were watching this happen. We were really getting ready. And we were beginning to imagine the impossible, which is a full-fledged tidal wave of COVID, which when it happened even exceeded our worst nightmares.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think that was kind of how your hospital was able to stay afloat in the middle of, New York was one of the epicenters for the pandemic in the US. And are we right that you were kind of leading those efforts and that preparedness was sort of key in that whole sort of staying afloat when so many other hospitals didn't?
Well, in truth, all the hospitals of New York did a remarkable job. This was, I can't even describe. I think we went from 0 to probably 1 million infections in the city within just a few weeks. It exploded in New York. We didn't know how quickly it was growing because we didn't have testing available. Mm. And I think in retrospect, we realized that ultimately well over 2 million New Yorkers got infected in that spring. And that's why the hospitals were so inundated. And every hospital stood up in an amazing way. I think what helped, gave us a bit of a head start was that special pathogens focus. We had teams already in place. We're always thinking about this. We're busy training. We do simulations and whatnot. So we have a lot of experience. But this was way beyond anything we ever had thought about or prepared for. So the sheer volume of it all was the great unexpected challenge. And here, I think, what we effectively had to do was transform our hospital in about 3 weeks. Mm. And we went from 0 to 60, in those few weeks. But we knew we had to create a lot of new spaces for patients. So our carpenters, our electricians, our plumbers were busy at work, literally transforming space into new inpatient rooms and beds. 100 new beds were created in just a couple of weeks. Wow. They went around our ICU cubicles and they installed HEPA filters and exhaust fans, and they made holes in the windows, and they made every one of our 56 cubicles into a negative pressure zone in just a couple of weeks. And the patients were flying into the front door, and we were putting them into beds literally as the room was created. It was really a race, as I said in that video news clip. And we did just stay ahead of it. But in addition to the space and physical space changes, we had to change all the staff's roles and responsibilities. So we redeployed everybody. Our surgeons gave up their surgery and became medical doctors. Our medical doctors became ICU doctors. The ophthalmologists joined the ICU team. The anesthesiologists, who are no longer doing surgery, were doing the procedures for all the other doctors. And the orthopedists, this is best of all, they became the proning team. That's the folks who turn the patients from face up to face down and back again on a schedule, which improves ventilation and respiratory status. It's a physical job. these orthopedic surgeons, it's not surgery, but it's what they did for us. And everybody willingly, and like I said, it's a mission-driven place. Everybody willingly joined in. We were all aligned. And in 3 weeks, the hospital was a completely different hospital. And it was the hospital that had to be for COVID patients, right? And we just kept filling beds. And fortunately, the non-COVID patients disappeared, or we would not have been able to do this. And it's a shame because there were a lot of non-COVID patients who stayed away from hospitals and didn't get the care they needed. But after we took that hit, we were breathing pretty hard. We had, we were a different kind of hospital.
You ran the race.
Yeah, we ran the race. It's early April. And but we looked around, the outer boroughs had it worse. So Brooklyn and Queens, even more patients than we had, big avalanche. And their emergency departments were packed with patients who had nowhere to go.
Oh, wow.
So then we did the thing that I am most proud of all the things we did. We started bringing them to Bellevue. We started bringing in transfers, first in small numbers, 2, 4, 6 at a time. And then we started bringing in 40 a day. 10 of them would be, at least 10 would be ICU patients, and the other 30 would be other kinds of patients. And they were coming in just one after another, kind of like an airlift or something, that the ambulances were full of patients and dropping them off. And we took 600 additional patients over a few weeks. And this is where I feel like this couldn't necessarily happen everywhere, but at Bellevue, the alignment was unbelievable. And the staff never complained about the transfers. They just took it. And we began to come apart at the seams because we were just like everybody else, just filled to the brim. We had 2 patients in every ICU cubicle. We began to park patients in the emergency department, because there was no other space, and we had a bunch of ventilator patients down there. And when we got to 400, it was Easter Sunday. And thankfully, it began to recede. The city had done a crackdown, kind of closed things down. And, a couple weeks after that, we saw it recede, and we hit our high point at Easter, thank goodness. But when it was all said and done, I think we were very proud of the effort. And we saw more death than we have ever seen before, but we saw many, many lives saved. We treated maybe 1,500 patients in 6 or 8 weeks.
Wow.
And there were maybe 250 of them died, but the others were saved. And many of them went on ventilators and then recovered.
Wow.
So, it was worth the effort. And, it's just one more way that Bellevue, has fulfilled its legacy.
That's amazing.
It feels like there should be a section of medical education that's like crisis management. It feels like you were actually in crisis management. Is that part of medical education, or should it be, or is it somewhere?
No, I think you are spot on. And in truth, we do a lot of emergency preparation in the hospital. I used to not believe in it. It just felt like we were planning for these things that never seemed to happen. But in truth, we plan for big trauma events, trauma disasters, where patients would come in, kind of like Las Vegas after the shooting, a massive trauma event. We prepare for terrorist activities, weather events. Superstorm Sandy is an example, and big snowstorms and things. And so it turns out these things aren't that uncommon.
Right.
And I've come to appreciate it pays off. I don't think they teach medical students in medical school, but hospitals do have lots of training around disaster preparation. It's totally worth it.
You never know.
Right.
Until you need it.
Preparation really matters and makes all the difference. It's so much fun to do something hard when you're ready for it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was what we felt with the Ebola patient. It was such a pleasure to just follow the drill, and it all works. So yeah, I definitely a believer in disaster plan.
Yeah. Whenever you were at the table, at the round table, right? And you're like, we need to prepare for COVID. Did everyone kind of look at you and say, all right, you've got, this is yours? And if they did, what did you do? How did you feel? Or was it just kind of, it casually became your responsibility?
Well, okay, so I'm in the leadership team of the hospital, and my boss is the chief executive officer. And I work with the chief financial officer and the operating officer and the nursing officer. We work like a team, and leadership is a team sport if played well. And we have a good team, and I'm very, happy and pleased with my team. Early on, my CEO, my boss, pulled me aside when we saw it was really going to explode, and he said, "Look," I said, I think we need to have a daily meeting of all our leaders. We have to have really good communication going. So let's just plan a morning meeting. We'll have 100 people on the call. It's a WebEx by now. Let's do this every day as long as we need to, and then make sure everybody's in the loop.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, but I want you to run the meeting because this is going to be a clinical response, and I'm going to support you.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you everything you need. Don't worry about supplies, PPE, whatever, but you're going to have to organize the physicians and nurses. And so we did this meeting for an hour every morning for 100 consecutive days, right? Weekends, everything was the same. Everybody logged on. Wow. It was completely transparent. Every problem was laid on the table, discussed openly, suggestions made. We would come to conclusions and then carry them out. It was consensus. It's a little unwieldy to think an hour a day of this, but we had another hour late in the day where all the clinical chiefs were online, and we discussed the real deep clinical topics. And that was two times a day for 100 days. Do you know that at the end of that, the biggest complaint anybody had over the way we managed things is we didn't communicate enough. So that is, despite our best efforts, not that the word didn't always get out to everybody who needed to hear it. And that's a great lesson in leadership. And I'll never forget how important it is to communicate openly in a crisis.
Yeah.
But we had a great leadership team that just, came into play. And then all of our chiefs of our departments were really fantastic because there was no territoriality.
Yeah.
Everybody sort of gave up their turf and just pitched in and did whatever was needed. And the surgeons especially, I thought, were very unselfish because they gave up their life as a surgeon and it became something else. And everybody was willing to do it. That's a great thing about a crisis. It does bring out the best in people. Yeah. And I saw that in spades, but it really helped to have that organizing meeting, on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Jess and I were actually here in Houston when Hurricane Harvey hit. And as soon as we were able to leave our homes, one of the first things that we did together was go down to where all of the sort of hurricane shelters were being put up and where all the refugees were being held. And we had to wait in line. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jess. I think we waited in line for like an hour and a half to volunteer.
Yeah.
Because they had so many volunteers that they were actually inundated.
Yes.
And it was truly like really cool. It's exactly what you said. People step up to the challenge when there's a really, life-altering event for everyone.
Yeah, agreed. I wish we did more of that in the nation.
Right.
Not unfair.
Yeah.
I want to switch the focus a little bit. So I read an article that you wrote about racism and the life expectancy gap, which for our listeners, we'll link that in our show notes so you guys can read it too, because it's really important to read. But could you tell our listeners a little bit about your thoughts on the topic, specifically about racial disparities in healthcare?
Sure.
Just a light topic. No big deal.
Yeah. Well, let me back up a little bit and say, I wrote this book, The Ailing Nation, Lessons from the Bedside for America's Leaders. And
we love the book. We bought it.
It's
so good.
Thank you. Well, the point of the book was to take lessons from my world and apply them to the political world. And I believe the healthcare industry, the field of medicine, has advanced so remarkably in its standards, the way we use evidence to treat, to make decisions, the way we handle mistakes, the way we treat our staff, the way we treat our patients. They're very high standards. The just culture, which we can talk about, and I looked across the divide in the political world, and it didn't seem anywhere like what the world I lived in.
Yeah.
And the gaps are so huge, it just feels like it's in the dark ages, actually. And so I decided to write this book to address that, share some of the lessons learned in my world. And each chapter in the book starts with a story or two, leads to a lesson in leadership. And then I try to apply that, to the political world.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been doing a lot of thinking about politics, and I've been making these video essays, which I call evidence-based politics. And I'm taking political topics and looking at the evidence that comes to bear and making conclusions about that topic. I want to, so I establish a standard here about using the truth to make decisions.
Yeah.
So racism, is it's maybe the biggest political topic, I think, actually driving our nation's leaders and our voters. It's just behind almost everything.
Yeah.
It's not a topic you normally think lends itself to evidence, but in fact it does. Like almost any topic can be addressed with evidence because we know something about almost everything. People do a lot of studies. So let me just start with something called the minimal group paradigm. I don't know if you've heard this term, but it's in the world of psychology. This is a big topic. And the point of this is that if people will identify groups with even the barest reason, a minimal characteristic that defines your group, once you've decided you're in a group, you become intensely loyal to your group.
Yeah.
You favor your group, and you disfavor everyone else. They've done these studies in kids. At the age of 4, you can just flip a coin and put the kids in 2 groups. Put blue shirts on one group, put red shirts in the other group, and in no time, this very powerful identification begins. And they really discriminate against the other group. They're mean and insulting, and they compliment and look upon, their own group. This is clearly kind of baked into our DNA. It's a human trait to identify on teams. And if you think about it, all the teams we identify with are sports teams, of course. We go crazy for our sports teams. But we have teams of race, gender, religion, political party.
Oh, yeah.
School, community, Boy Scout troop, you name it. Once you've decided you're on a team, you really become loyal to your team.
Yep.
And I think that explains a lot of politics. And I think it explains a lot of racism. This is well researched. This is evidence.
Yeah.
It's human nature. And I think ultimately it's important for us to appreciate that that's there so that we can, it's almost like a system defect in the human race, that we have this tendency. And maybe in the old days, like in the days of the cave people, it was very important to be in a tribe and your safety depended on it. But, in our interconnected world, it just does harm.
Yeah.
I've been working on some of my videos, including the topic of racism, and I thought healthcare would be a good one because that's my world.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not that familiar with evidence about racism in healthcare, so I was blown away by what I came across. There's a very rich research base on this topic. A lot of studies have been done to show how differently Black people of color are treated by healthcare providers, by the healthcare system. And you can name a disease, and there's been a study to show that Black people are undertreated, mistreated, treated by a different standard.
Yeah.
We don't respond to their pain as readily. We're not as quick to do the expensive test. They don't have as good access. And this is even beyond insurance status and financial capability. This is pure and simple about the race of the patient. In fact, there was a wonderful study done on doing cardiac catheterizations, which is an intense procedure that people with heart disease sometimes need. Mm-hmm. It's done in a laboratory by experts. It's a procedure that takes about an hour, and it's expensive. And we're not as quick to offer a cardiac catheterization to a Black person with the same presentation as a white person with chest pain. There was a hospital in Cleveland that decided to change their approach to making this decision about who gets the cath. They formed a committee to review the clinical characteristics of the patients, to review the chart, and then make an objective, informed decision about which patient should have the cath procedure done.
Mm-hmm.
And they were told every single fact about the patient except their race. So it was race blind review. And when they did it that way, the race bias disappeared. The Black and white patients got treated equally.
Right.
So it was the knowledge of the race of the patient. And I don't believe this is conscious racism. I don't think anybody's, setting out to bar the door, for Black people. But I think any kind of physician, whoever they are, however well-meaning they are, has unconscious bias. And we may think of a symptom in a different way if it's being told by a Black person than a white person. It could be as simple as that. We may take some patients more seriously than others, or we might just, in the back of our minds, attach a class to the patient and decide who's more deserving. I do believe it's unconscious for most. I think most physicians would be appalled to know that they practice this way, but they probably almost all do. I was just completely shocked by how much good data there is to show this bias occurs. And I think it's important actually to teach physicians. And there is a movement. There's a movement, no question. My hospital talks about this. Whenever there's an adverse event that takes place, a patient is harmed, a mistake maybe happened, we're interviewing and we're reviewing to see what might have gone wrong. One of the questions that's always asked is there any evidence of equity bias?
Yeah.
And that goes beyond, it goes beyond race, could be gender bias, could
Right.
be age bias, but it's a question that we are forced to ask ourselves every time a patient is not treated the way we would like, because who knows, we got to have open eyes, to address. If you don't recognize it, you'll never correct it.
Right.
So we're just trying to raise consciousness around the issue, which no doubt, I'm sure even in my hospital, we like to think, we're the mission-driven public hospital. I am sure the same thing happens in my hospital too.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the concept, I've talked about it in work. I work for an executive headhunting firm. So there's a heightened sense of equity and access on the team I work to provide all people, especially historically disenfranchised people, access to these positions of power. And we said on one of our meetings, it's not enough to not be racist. You have to be anti-racist now.
Yeah.
There's a different action behind that. And that sounds like that's what you're doing at this amazing place you work that everyone should go and see, because it sounds like this is the best kind of experience for a patient that you're creating there.
Well, we hope so. Again, I think if we're going to be really honest with ourselves, we're probably not where we need to be yet. It's probably on a journey that never ends.
Yeah.
But, unless you're thinking about it all the time, you're probably not going to improve yourself. So, but I agree with your points very much.
And a big part of it too is just the intentionality. I mean, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are being demanded in tons of different public spaces now where they never have been. And I think for a lot of time, everyone just expected certain groups of people to take it on the chin and keep moving. And I think that we're moving past, I hope that we're moving past that. But it feels like, have you seen efforts being made like that in medicine? Do you feel like they're making strides?
Yes, we are making progress. We're making progress as a nation. We have our setbacks. It feels like we've had recent setbacks, but I keep reminding myself, I remind my kids, this is a long journey. And, at one point, Black people were slaves, and then they were horribly mistreated after that. And then, even in my lifetime, it wasn't even legal. It was against the law to, ride in the front of the bus or go to certain schools. And, that is not that long ago.
Right.
We have gone far. We have so much further to go. But if we back up a little bit and look at those incremental changes, they are moving in the right direction, and they're not always forward, and sometimes they're backward, but in the balance, I mean, just think we had a Black president not too long ago, and 20 years ago, that wouldn't even be possible. So
Right.
we have to remember that there is slow and steady progress being made, and that helps us, get past our setbacks.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about history, right? I think people think of history as like linear, but it's actually like a ton of intersections. And if we talk about healthcare history a lot, that's like the whole purpose of our podcast. And it's like you think about. I just saw again, obsessed with TikTok. I saw this TikTok where it said it's crazy to think like Anne Frank and like Martin Luther King Jr. were alive at the same time, and we associate those periods of time, especially with like teaching history, right? They're in two separate spaces, but almost everything's happening at the same time always. And it's just like kind of juggling that instead of thinking of it as one and then one, it's actually all kind of spinning.
Yeah, like a matrix. I think you're exactly right. I agree. And we just have to remember that.
It's a hard one. It sounds like we should just give that problem to Bellevue because they handle all the hard problems.
There you go. Yeah, the last line of defense.
You said political setbacks, and I was like, which one could you possibly be talking about?
Cindy won't let us go that deep. We'll get in trouble. She'll cut it out of the editing.
Okay, fair enough.
I was struck by the first sentence on page 2 of your book, and it's literally just like doctors make mistakes. And we've interviewed several doctors and who say the same thing. They're like, we're just people. Like everybody, we'll ask them, leaving our audience with something, what would you like to say? And they almost always say that they make mistakes. Why do you think people forget that?
Well, I think it's human nature to expect people not to make mistakes. And when mistakes are made, try to figure out who made it. And to point fingers, and then to achieve some form of justice, which is a punishment, for example. I do think it's human nature. We need to be aware of those dark tendencies we have. In medicine, we have a monthly conference called the Morbidity and Mortality Conference. It's where mistakes are reviewed. It's actually a wonderful tradition in medicine. But it wasn't always the most positive experience. When I was, starting out in training, the M&M was a little bit like a trial. You had all the physicians together.
Yeah.
The person who made the mistake had to come up and present their case and discuss it, and then field all the questions, which was a little bit like a trial. You were put on the spot. And I think sometimes people wanted that person to get up there and take their hit, to be that was the punishment to kind of set the record straight.
Yeah.
The problem with that is nobody wanted to present, and everybody tried to hide their mistakes. I mean, that was the real problem. Making a mistake was a deep, dark secret, and people kept things under wraps. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't good for morale for that to take place. Well, over time, as many of the other changes in medicine have been for the good, this was also. The M&M culture changed, and it became more of a positive experience, an educational session. And nowadays, and again, we still have it once a month, and the dirty laundry comes to light. It's transparent. That's always been a good thing. But the person who presents is really well supported. We empathize with them. We thank them for sharing. We don't make them stand up and take all the hits. They present their case, and then we let them take a seat, and then we have an open discussion. And what are the learning points of the case? That's why I call it kind of an exercise in atonement. Something didn't go wrong for me, but the way I make it right afterward is I talk about it, share it, so that others learn from my experience, and we're all in this together, right? So that has been a sea change in my world for the better. Because mistakes will always happen. It's just too complex medicine. No one is going to do this perfectly. I think the most egregious mistakes we used to make, we don't make as often anymore. Systems have improved. The healthcare system is much better at preventing mistakes than it used to be. But part of the reason for that is our transparency.
Yeah.
And the idea of a just culture, which is we're all in this together, and we're not blaming and shaming people.
Yeah. Could you tell us about some of the biggest changes you've seen in this medical environment and in medicine in general since you started?
Yes, well, many changes actually, when I really think about it. Uh, One of the important changes that has happened in our field overall is something we call evidence-based medicine. So if I were to turn back the clock to the 80s when I first came on as a trainee, I wouldn't say we were that much of an evidence-based profession. In truth, hospital settings were very hierarchical. Everybody had their place, and it was usually the most senior professor who carried the day. Their opinion or their speculation was considered the truth, or whoever spoke the loudest or most obnoxiously would be the one to prevail, right? In a conversation, and it wasn't always about looking for facts or getting to the truth. So what began in around the early 90s was a movement in medicine to change all that, to develop standards and expectations that we will go to the literature, the research papers to look for our truth. We will look for high quality studies and conclusions from those studies to drive our care. We will develop guidelines that are based on those truths, and then that becomes the king of the road, and not the one person who speaks the loudest, but actually the truth speaks the loudest. And in the modern hospital, the person who can quote the paper or find the evidence to bring to bear is the person who wins out in that discussion. As you can imagine, that was a big change. It was upending the established order. In fact, some of those senior people were the most resistant to the change.
Yeah.
Some of the specialists.
Yeah, go figure.
Yeah, and if you can imagine, a specialist might feel a little bit threatened because they've got all this experience and they want to be the oracle and to speak the truth and be heard. But people would say, "Yeah, but where's the beef? Like, well, how do you know this is true with this thing you're saying?" And people would be checked on their sources. Well, in the end, the specialists really drove this forward. The specialists of my world developed the guidelines for their specialties for all the care that's provided. And nowadays, you can find recommended guidelines for almost any disease we treat, and they're very solidly based on evidence. That is the truth. And that is a sea change that I saw take place over these 40 years.
That's awesome. We love evidence. Sydney's Sydney's a scientist, so she really loves evidence.
Yeah, and we all should. We all should. And I've just been disappointed how in our political world, I think the truth has taken a big hit in recent years, and I see such a huge difference, such a huge gap between the standards in the world of healthcare and the standards in the political world, where so much more is at stake, actually. So it's disappointing.
Right.
Yeah, I was watching a video today on TikTok because I'm obsessed with TikTok, and my TikTok knows me, so it showed me a video of someone who was like, "I got the vaccine and now I'm magnetic." She was speaking at like a city council or something meeting,
Right.
and she was holding up keys, and she was like, "See, they're sticking to me." They were not sticking to her; they were falling on the ground, and she was like, "Do you see?" And I was like, nobody sees.
But if she's dancing to a catchy tune on TikTok, she's going to get a lot of believers. So that's kind of the current standard.
Correct.
She knows. I watched it a couple times. I'm like, are they sticking to her? They weren't sticking.
Yeah. On the other side of that coin, so it sounds like you've seen a tremendous amount of progress, which is
that's awesome.
Fantastic to hear from the perspective of someone who's looking at careers in the medical field, but also from the perspective of a patient, to be quite honest. It's like great to hear. But on the other side of that coin, what do you think are the biggest problems that we're facing in the future in the medical field?
Well, let's see.
I know we dropped the easy ones.
Yeah, well, one big topic continues to be access and equity. And that is a challenge. We haven't completely solved it. One reason we have hospitals like Bellevue is because we haven't solved that. And we have a private sector that there are a lot of people in New York who don't have health insurance. And there are people who do have health insurance, but still don't have the same access as other people. And that is a challenge we have a long way to go to solve. Then the next problem is healthcare is really expensive, and the expense keeps growing, and we haven't learned how to cut that, the growth rate, and learn how to maybe live within our means and not keep sucking up so much resource out of the rest of the economy. We've been very greedy in healthcare, and we just kind of keep growing our proportion of the national pie. We just keep taking a bigger piece. And so it's about efficiency and appropriateness of care. And, we're getting better at using evidence, and we keep learning, but we have so many knowledge gaps to close. This is going to keep us occupied, definitely for the rest of my life, and maybe, 2 generations beyond. So plenty to work on, starting with an equity issue.
Lots of progress to be made.
What is something that you wish every person knew regarding the medical space? Whether, a patient, everyone off the street, they just knew this one thing. He's like, read my book.
Yes.
There's lots of things.
One of the things I want all Americans to realize is that they are leaders. They're leaders of our country. The way our country is organized constitutionally and democratically, the citizens of America are the board of directors, right? They vote, they pick our leaders, just like any board of directors picks the leader of a corporation. We're picking the leaders of our country. That's a sacred task. That's a big responsibility. And we need to realize when we're unhappy with the behavior of our leaders, we need to have some introspection about how we're making these decisions and what are the attributes that we're looking for in leaders. And so my one message of my book in the end is that we are America's leaders, and we're accountable for how it turns out. And if we're not happy with the way things are going, it's on us. We have to take that seriously.
I love that.
And I spent a lot of my book talking about the systematic approach to running a hospital. And I'm just saying, I think our voters need to have a little bit more of a systematic approach in the running of our country. And so
that's awesome.
That's my message.
Yeah, it's almost like advocating for yourself as a patient is like the same mentality that you should go into voting with, right?
Yeah. It's easy to say someone else is responsible. That is human nature,
right?
And I think one of the most healthy things to do as a person is always to say, what's my part in this thing that's not going well? What's my part? It's the only thing you can change is what your own behavior.
Yeah.
And I think we need to do a little more introspection about that.
It feels like you're doing a lot. Frankly, it feels like you're doing a lot to change the landscape of medicine. What are some of your interests and passions outside of medicine?
Well, I love to travel. It's like my favorite thing. My wife and I and our family, we travel a lot. I spent a year in Kenya in 1990. I lived there for a year. It was probably the most transformative experience of my life. And maybe the best, most interesting and a growing year for me. But I got myself out of my comfort zone. I saw the world from a whole different perspective. And it was hugely important for me for the rest of my life to have seen that and appreciate, differences in people. There are things we all share, humanity, all the people of the earth, we share so much. And we have these important differences that we have to learn to respect and understand. And ultimately, I wish we could all think of ourselves as being on one team. But like I said, it's human nature to identify on smaller teams and set up these constructs where we have opposition and we're trying to get a leg up on the opposition, and we wind up sort of boxing ourselves into these positions that are very difficult to get out of.
Yeah. And it's neurological, right? Like humans can't stop doing that. We look for patterns everywhere.
No, absolutely. And
So we've touched on a lot of really heavy topics, and I know our listeners are really going to enjoy this because, first of all, you've got us talking politics, and Sydney never lets me do this, so
Oh.
it's a free for all now.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Anything's on the table if he talks about it.
but we want to leave because we started asking everyone that we interview this question, and that's how do you take your coffee as like our final question. So how do you take your coffee?
And is this supposed to be metaphorical or?
No, it can be. You're interpreting it as you will.
Whatever you want. Yeah.
Lots of milk. And when I'm ordering it in a coffee shop, I'll say I need this much milk in the top of my coffee because I don't like really hot coffee. So never sugar, but lots of milk.
Love that.
Awesome.
Never sugar. That's interesting. And do you normally, before you go to work in the morning, you normally sit down and have your coffee, or do you usually take it on the run, or what's your morning coffee routine?
No, I sit down and I spend 10 minutes just sitting in a chair drinking my coffee and musing over the morning. And that's usually around 5:30.
Ugh.
And then I get on a train and I'm an hour and a half later in the city because I live very far away from New York City. And although I love my train ride, I'm on the train for an hour and I'm reading and all the way in and I'm sleeping all the way home. And it's kind of a perfect part of my day. And then I have a second cup as I get to work. So my 2 cups with lots of milk.
That's awesome.
That's lovely.
Well, we want to thank you so much, not only for being on this podcast, but also for all the work you did and continue to do at your place of employment to make, real change. We are very inspired. I was messaging Sydney like, wow, he is awesome. And we appreciate it. We really do.
Hey, Mal Pals. We hope you love this episode. We certainly loved making it. You can find the links for Dr. Link's book, as well as all of the interviews and everything that we referenced in our show notes. Sorry, for a second there I was saying link too many times and I got stressed. As always, the best way to support our show and help us grow our business is by liking, subscribing, and leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast fix. We hope you love the show. Thank you. Bye.